Welcome to our 6th episode. We got something special today for our listeners. It's a tale of striking similarities with nuanced differences. Meet the two Amandas. Amanda Lee, an international arbitrator and founder of Careers in Arbitration, and Amanda Lees, a partner at King & Wood Mallesons. Distinguished by just one S in their last names, both had made significant contributions to the arbitration community. So let's get started.
Hi, Mandy. Welcome to Singapore.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here.
So it's very exciting to actually have you in Singapore because I'm sure many of the listeners might know that we sometimes get confused.
Absolutely.
And the first time we actually met in person was a couple of years ago at ICA in Edinburgh. And obviously we're recording this in the lead up to ICA in Hong Kong, which is next week. So it's great to have you on your first trip to Singapore.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to ICA Hong Kong as well. No doubt more people will confuse us, and we will have the opportunity to publish another guide to your Amandas.
We will indeed. We will indeed. So we're obviously going to talk about a few different topics.
We are.
Today. I think probably let's talk about how each of us got to where we are, because I think we've been on slightly similar but very different journeys in order to get here in our positions as arbitrator, counsel, mediation counsel. Anything to do with dispute resolution basically is how I consider it myself.
Absolutely.
So, Mandy, how did you get here?
British Airways flew me. No, they did. Yes, the food was nice. Anyway, so how did I get here? Well, it was an interesting journey. I began my career in law at a boutique dispute resolution practice in London. People say to me, well, how did you get into arbitration? I say, well, it was more a case of delegation than design. I had the privileged opportunity of simply being exposed to arbitration alongside construction, adjudication, commercial litigation, anything ending in shin. So like you, I do the shins, as it were. And I did that for a number of years, cut my teeth on big pieces of commercial litigation and international and domestic arbitrations, and eventually decided to become self-employed and started sitting as an arbitrator, started teaching, carried on with the counsel work, and began diversifying, shall we say. So that is a very quick snapshot. So this is going to be, of course, a tale of two Amandas. So, Amanda, how did you get into the world of arbitration?
Well, a bit like yourself, I had differently in that I had a earlier career. I didn't start off doing law. I had a career in what's called the public service in Australia, civil service in the UK, where I worked both in Commonwealth, state health departments, and in the UK health and safety executive. Did some travelling. All of these things meant that I did my law degree part-time and only started becoming a lawyer at the old age of 30 as compared to the age that normal graduates are. Discovered that I loved litigation. Mm-hmm. Hadn't intended to be a litigator, was going to continue to do health. Discovered I loved litigation, became a commercial litigator, did my first arbitration matter not very long after sort of settling in litigation. Really loved it. Got to learn more and more about arbitration. Did the CIR diploma course, which I think is a great course, and became more involved. And after I'd been doing arbitrations and arbitration-related litigation along with normal litigation, for sort of, 11 years, the opportunity came to come up to Singapore. And so I headed to Singapore 12 and a half years ago now. And since I've been in Singapore, I've primarily done arbitration, some mediation, and instructed on some Singapore litigation, but primarily arbitration. And yeah, I am passionate about it, but I think as you would agree, litigation is a very good way to learn a lot of the skills you need for arbitration. And having a background in commercial litigation is actually very, very helpful. You learn how to think about things forensically.
Absolutely.
Evidence is much more difficult when you've got to present it in court. It's public.
Absolutely. I mean, litigation is a wonderful breeding ground for the skills that you'll need as arbitration counsel. And I strongly encourage anyone who has the opportunity to do both to make sure that you've got both strings to your bow. There's a lot that arbitration can learn from litigation, I think. There are things that litigation judges think about that arbitrators don't always need to take into account. And we see things like this in the English Commercial Court Guide. We see encouragement from the bench for junior advocates to be given the opportunity to speak. How often do we see that in arbitration? How often do arbitrators say, hey, I'd really like to hear from the fourth lawyer on the team. We think they should have an opportunity to speak. And of course, it's an excellent breeding ground for arbitrators. Advocacy, being able to speak, being counsel. If you don't get to speak, how will anyone know if you're any good?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, some of the other innovations we've seen from litigation has been the increasing focus on case management. I mean, that really came from the commercial courts. And also some of the innovations with experts really first came from the commercial courts. And in fact, hot tubbing has been described as Australia's gift to the world of dispute resolution because it came, was first really used in Australia in the litigation there. But so I think it is good to have both and see and be influenced by both. And as you say, learn those skills. One of the things that, how I first got to know of you, Mandy, was when you were chair of the young members group of CIARB.
Yes.
How have those sorts of leadership roles shaped your career?
I think they've been extremely significant. Many of the key skills that you need to perform well as an arbitrator require you to be able to work constructively as part of a team. They require you to be able to plan. They require you to be able to control a room full of people. And committees are, after all, a room full of people. And having the opportunity to lead organizations like the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Young Members Group was a wonderful experience in that early stage of my career when I first started getting more actively involved with the arbitration community. And of course, as I constantly bore people by saying, we are a community. This is a group of people. You have to get involved if you want to make your mark. So the Chartered Institute was a wonderful stepping stone for me. I served on the London branches committee as well. I ended up serving on the Institute's board of management, and then I started serving on Arbitral Women's board as well. So there was a time when I was collecting committee appointments, and I know that you collected a few committee appointments of your own as well, Amanda. Can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Well, likewise, I was chair of AFIA, which is the Asia Pacific Forum for International Arbitration, and was one of the sort of pioneer young arbitral sort of organisations that was set up in the Asia Pacific region before you had Young SEAC, before you had HK45, before you had Young Kika. And I was chair of that in 2011 and 2012. And as you say, it was a great experience. One, I'd been involved on the committee before becoming chair, as learning how to manage different people, compromising, because AFIA, there's always two chairs. You don't always agree on things. You have to work out a consensus as to what to do, working with other people in different jurisdictions, putting on events, fantastic for visibility, but also a lot of hard work. And I think with these sorts of organisations, and I've also been involved in CIARB and on the board of directors here in Singapore for over 8 years now. These organisations are great in terms of learning skills, but they also require you to put in. The more you put in, the more you'll get out of it.
Absolutely.
And it frustrates other people involved in an organisation if you do get involved but don't actually put the work in. and so it can damage your reputation that way. So it's really important to only get involved in things if you've got the energy to do so. But then you can get a lot out of it. You get visibility, you get opportunities. It is a lot of hard work, but it's fun, and you get to meet more people.
Absolutely. You may get to travel. You could be involved in events all over the world. A number of the people that I served on the Institute's Global Steering Committee with are the people who nowadays, if I'm having a tricky technical procedural moment as an arbitrator and I need to bounce ideas off somebody, if I'm thinking about something theoretically, those are the people that I talk to, the people I served with. So those peers become your sort of almost your peer mentors, as it were. Those are the people who are going through the same things as you're going through. And
I completely
they're a great
agree.
resource.
And for me, being involved in CIARB here in Singapore has meant that I've become really good friends with a range of lawyers. So not just lawyers who are in international firms, but also lawyers who are in local firms, because there can be a bit of a divide here between local and international. And CIARB is one of those organisations that crosses that divide. So that's been a fantastic experience, and getting to know people so much better, as you say, and having a reference group that you can speak to anonymously when you have a question. When you have a question.
Yes. Absolutely. Because after all, there are so many things that are not in textbooks. Once you start sitting as an arbitrator, the weird and wonderful situations that seem to manifest are a constant delight. No drafter of any textbook could come up with some of the peculiar scenarios that I have had presented to me as an arbitrator in real life. So
I completely agree. In fact, my very first arbitral appointment, you wouldn't have thought this was possible, but it was a very small dispute. This is for those out there who think arbitration is glamorous. This was a dispute of $80,000 US about scrap metal. So not at all glamorous.
So my entire career is scrap metal and waste, generally, waste management.
So, scrap metal, and I decided that because it was only $80K, that the Spanish witness could give evidence by video conference. Initially, the council here in Singapore didn't think I had the power to order that, so we had to have a procedural decision on that. But anyway, we got there. If it was possible, these lawyers in Spain and the lawyers in Singapore almost came to blows over the video conference. I did not think this was possible. And that's when I realised how important a skill it was to actually have control of the council. Because sometimes they really can get actually quite heated and difficult. So what are some of the key skills you think you need as an arbitrator, Mandy?
Well, my big recommendation to anyone who is keen to become an arbitrator or is already an arbitrator, develop your project management skills. Project management is absolutely essential. You need to be able to run the arbitration, and that means you need to have a real appreciation of how much time certain things are going to take. So when the parties say to you, we need this amount of time to do this, you can say to them, well, I think you might need a little bit longer. I think maybe that's a bit optimistic. Let's not set a procedural timetable that's going to jeopardize the hearing, and so on and so forth. I always joke that project management is absolutely key, because litigation and arbitration are just project management on steroids, basically. So that is my strong recommendation, project management. And my background was in project management in the healthcare sector, though not in quite the same way that you were working in the healthcare sector. I was rather more junior, and I was working in a sort of payroll and human resources capacity. But I had the opportunity to start developing some of those skills and then hone them in my career. What about you? What key skills would you recommend?
Well, I think the project management thing brings up an important point, which is that I think you have to have a certain level of experience before you become an arbitrator, because you have to know how long things are going to take and be able to say, actually, I think you've been reasonable or you've been unreasonable. Obviously, you've got to exercise a lot of judgment as an arbitrator. And again, that's something that comes through experience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the thing I find, particularly in the procedural phase, is that you often use a lot of soft skills, and particularly you're trying to persuade the parties to agree on a particular course, sort of come to a consensus on the procedure. You don't want it to be that where you're always imposing things on people. So you want to try and bring them together and come up with something that everyone can agree on. And this is one thing I think was the silver lining that came out of COVID. Personally, I hated COVID. I hated lockdowns. But the silver lining was we did get much more comfortable with doing online hearings.
Yes.
And they're extremely useful for procedural hearings because you can say at fairly short notice, okay, let's have a procedural hearing. So if I see that correspondence is getting very heated, there's a lot of head-butting between the counsel, then I can say, okay, let's have a procedural conference and then we can all talk about it and we can try and work away how to resolve this without it just being me imposing things. Obviously, you've got to also understand natural justice and the importance of that, and that trips up a lot of inexperienced arbitrators, and you see that from some of the cases. And then obviously when you get to writing the award, that in itself is its own skill. There I think project management is very important. I read a very good thing. I know my first few awards, I was always waiting till I had a whole week free to write. You
never have a whole week free. Where is this week coming from?
I know, it never happens. And then I read something very sensible actually that a few judges have said to new judge conferences, right? Just start writing. And that's what I started to do. I just started writing. Even if I could only write for half an hour a day on the award, I just started it. Just get going. Yeah. And so I think that's the most important thing when you come to writing the award is just start doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I write the procedural sections as I go along, so I update them as I'm going. And it's often helpful because you get to spot weird and wonderful inconsistencies in the addresses that you've been given, and this person's given you an expired power of attorney, and these sorts of weird and wonderful things pop up. But I've had the joy when I first started sitting as an arbitrator, I did a lot of documents-only litigant in-person arbitrations. So one of the skills that you have to develop is the ability to communicate with people of all levels of knowledge, including parties who have no legal knowledge at all and are going to be expecting you to basically work out what the law is and apply it correctly. So for a long time, I had many emails that were, this is what the seat is. This is how we select it. This is what this means. No, we don't have to have a hearing in that place. It's fine. We can do it online. So I became quite a good diplomat when it came to communicating with parties who were not represented and making sure that they were not at a disadvantage in the proceedings. And it's all about fair play. Everybody's got to be treated fairly.
Exactly. And that's something where you certainly see in this region. I've had a number of cases where parties from different jurisdictions in this region don't have representation, are communicating directly with the tribunal. And when you're sort of the chair of the tribunal or sole arbitrator, you're the one who, as you say, you've got to work out how to communicate, how to get it across, despite where there's both the cultural differences as well as the lack of legal knowledge and the lack of understanding of arbitration. And so, I'm actually involved at the moment sitting as arbitrator in a case where I have exactly one of those parties, and it's just, every time I get an email from them, I inwardly groan. And then I steel myself to how am I going to reply to this? And then bizarrely, I have the other side accusing me of, being too generous to them in my advice. It's like, well, actually, all I'm doing is pointing them to the rules.
Yes.
And
you know those already. You know where they are.
That's all. But it is a real challenge, I think, when you have unrepresented participants.
Yes.
One of the nice things is generally as you get more experienced, you get to have international law firms appear before you and senior counsel, and
yes,
that's just a pleasure.
Absolutely. There is nothing like listening to really talented advocates having discussions with tribunals, and that's something that I always enjoy.
Yeah.
Litigants in person, just that little bit more challenging.
But it's the challenge that keeps us here, let's face it. I know for myself, one of the things that I love about arbitration is the fact that you do have parties from different parts of the world, coming from different legal traditions, having counsel from different parts of the world, and just negotiating and managing that.
Absolutely. I've had
keeps you on your toes.
French parties. I've had Italian parties. At the moment, I'm sitting in a case that's seated in Doha, so I'm having parties from different parts of the Middle East. So I'm getting a wonderful sort of window into cultural differences when it comes to arbitration practices, which is a fantastic educational experience and something every arbitrator needs, because after all, this is an international field and it's a privilege to get to see those different approaches in action.
I agree. It is a real privilege to be involved in international arbitration. And talking about being involved in international arbitration, how do you go about sustaining a career in international arbitration when, as you and I both know, you have to travel quite a lot?
Yes.
You have to deal with calls late at night or early in the morning, and you are dealing with a lot of demands. So how do you sustain such a career? What are your tips, Mandy?
Well, it's the immortal question, isn't it? How do I achieve that balance between real life and arbitration? I personally try to lean into exercise. So at the moment, I'm staying in Singapore. There is a bit of a time difference between the UK and Singapore, as I am finding with my UK practice, which continues to operate in the early hours of the morning. So I'm having some interesting conference calls at odd hours of the night, and I'm teaching classes at odd hours of the night, but that is just the price of doing business. But what I've been doing to sort of try and manage my health while I'm traveling is I swim. So I always stay in hotels with pools so I can get in the water and get a bit of cold water therapy, although I don't think that's really a thing in Singapore. You're getting in the pool at 6 o'clock in the morning and you're thinking, really, this is not that cold. But I get it. I do my 50 lengths. If I can't swim, I go for a run. So I'll run 5K, whether that's on a treadmill or otherwise. I eat a lot of fruit. So I stick very rigidly to my 5 a day. I try to eat healthily. I try to look after myself. And I'm an introvert, for anyone who didn't know. So I get like reception overload. If I go to too many events, I'm just like, no, I need to retreat to a quiet place in a corner somewhere, and I need to recharge. So I know myself. I've been doing this for 15 years or so now, and I've got to the point where I have my little arbitration survival guide when it comes to traveling. You make sure you exercise, you make sure you eat properly, you don't live, on potato chips and chocolate digestive biscuits or anything like that.
Much as we love those.
Well, yes, no disrespect to the chocolate digestive biscuits. I see some in front of me right now. But we have to look after ourselves, because after all, we're in this for the long haul. Being an arbitration practitioner, it's a marathon, not a sprint. What about you? How do you balance, to use my initiative's terminology?
Well, sort of similar. I do try and exercise. That's something which I really picked up during COVID. I didn't do very much beforehand. And during COVID, I've had to escape the house, and my 3 teenage children trying to do school online, and my husband and I slightly going crazy. So I started walking. In fact, I walked the whole way around Singapore during COVID. And I've kept it up. I'm not walking as much as I did during COVID, but I do still try and do 2 long walks a weekend, do a yoga class, and I've recently picked up boot camp for strength work to build up my muscles as they deplete as I age, which is an important thing. And so I try and do that. I try and eat relatively healthily as well. So I think that is all very important, exercise. I think the other thing I always try and do is get out into nature.
Yes.
I find nature incredibly good for just, replenishing, refilling the cup, as I think people refer to it as. And if I'm travelling somewhere, I'll try and tack on a bit of extra time to actually have some time to see the city I'm in. whether it's going for a walk, going to a gallery, doing something to actually get a sense of the place, because I think that's also important. Unlike you, I am an extrovert, but even I find that things like ICA, I'm feeling a little bit daunted about the week that's going to be ahead of us.
It's a lot. There's a lot of people. A lot of people.
A lot of receptions, a lot of different events. And I know it's going to be fun, but at the same time I have to make sure that I get some sleep as well. And I think, as someone who is in their 50s, and now it's become very trendy to talk about menopause, not something I talk about much, but as someone who has been through menopause, sleep becomes the most precious thing that you desire and want. Because unfortunately for women, it is something that gets really badly affected. And so, the importance of having a nice hotel room with a good bed and trying to get the temperature right has become a bit of an obsession.
I can't get the temperature right. I there seems to be a sort of like a sweet spot at a certain time of day where the air conditioning is not blowing my head off, but I haven't quite worked out when that is yet. But it's not when I'm trying to watch the snooker, because it's the World Championship for the snooker at the moment. And, that's the other thing I do to relax is I watch a lot of snooker, because I find it very therapeutic to watch little balls clinking against each other like Newton's cradle.
Right.
So that is I've been training as a snooker referee. So that's my.
Well, that's an interesting passion we haven't learned about. I like to read books.
I like to read books too.
I try now at bedtime read. Even if it's only for 5 or 10 minutes, it does help you to kind of switch off.
Yes.
And of course, I have 3 children, so that sort of does.
You get to switch off with 3 children.
I get to switch off with 3 children. Not as much now that they're older, but when they were little, you certainly had to pay your full attention to them, which also made you very in the moment, so to speak. Mindfulness.
Yes.
Rather than, thinking about what's going on at work.
Very good. And I think this. We've talked a little bit about our respective involvement with committees and young practitioner organizations and so on and so forth. And I think one of the things that we need to appreciate as practitioners is we need to know when enough is enough. We need to be able to say to ourselves, right, it's time for me to step back. It's time for me to move on. The next generation can rise and I will go and do something else, like have a really good nap and read a book and watch the snooker.
Yep.
In my case.
I think that's true. And I think that is an important thing when you're involved in an organisation to realise when's the time to leave and hand over to other people for fresh ideas.
Absolutely.
Because you can sort of reach the level of your usefulness as well in terms of the ideas and interests that you bring to something, and energy that you're able to contribute. So it's always good to know when to step back. And one of the things I used to do was run a sort of women in arbitration networking group. And obviously that stopped during COVID. It went for 7 years and we did a lot of events. We even had a half-day conference, which I was very proud of here in Singapore. But post-COVID, I saw that there are other great women like Jay Her at A&O who are doing things with young arbitral women practitioners. And I thought, you know what? It's their time to actually do stuff and step up. There are always other people who will step up. And so if you can see that there's a successor, then I think it's a very good time to sort of step back and let someone else have some limelight.
Absolutely. And I did the same thing. I stepped down from the Board of Arbitral Women after 4 years. I stepped down as chair of the Chartered Institute's Young Members Group Global Steering Committee after 2 years. I have an expiry date. I have a shelf life. I moved on to my own initiatives, which are, I don't have 3 teenage children. I have 3, very lively initiatives that keep me occupied and probably cost me less in school fees, I expect, which I'm sure is a delightful bonus. But yes, knowing when your time has come to move on is important. And I think in this field, it's key to recognize when your contribution has been exhausted and when you need to put your energy into something else.
So, Mandy, I know with your initiatives that you are all about particularly young practitioners and diversity.
Yes.
So what legacy do you hope to leave in arbitration, and what impact do you plan to have aim to have on future practitioners?
Well, having set up an initiative that focuses on making it just that little tiny bit easier for the next generation to get into the field, I hope that in some small way, when some of those people become, the next generation of leading arbitrators, they will remember that a long time ago, they found their first role on a feed on LinkedIn and they applied for it, and that was the beginning of everything that followed. I suppose my legacy will be, I would hope, to be a spark that hopefully leads to a flame. I don't know who those flames are going to be yet. I don't know who the next generation of, we have some idea. I don't know who the next generation of leading arbitrators will be. It'll be 20 years from now before we see them, I expect. But to the young people who are following my feed, I hope, to have made a very small but important difference. And for me, that's enough.
I think that's what you're doing is a great initiative. And I will say to people that sometimes people accidentally think that I am Mandy and come up and say thank you to me. And after I've been talking to them for a few minutes, I think you've got the wrong Amanda, and I have to correct them. But I think for myself, what I'm looking to do, particularly in the sort of next phase of my career, is continue obviously to encourage women to get involved in arbitration and ensure that women succeed as arbitrators, but also look at how we can continue to build capacity in some of the jurisdictions near to Singapore where there haven't been as many arbitration counsel and arbitrators, and what is it we can do to actually build capacity in those jurisdictions. I've already done some work in some of those jurisdictions, but particularly in Vietnam, which is one that I'm very fond of, but that's where I think I'll be looking to sort of direct my energies in the future, is how can we actually build capacity in Southeast Asia beyond Singapore.
And I see lots of praise for you on LinkedIn for your involvement with Vietnam, for example. So that is always encouraging to see. For those listening, I get far more interesting emails. Amanda gets people thanking her and sending them her resume. Amanda has a very exciting career, I can tell you. I get all sorts of interesting inquiries, and I'm forced to say, this would be wonderful. I'd really like to do this, but I don't think you need me. I think you're looking for Amanda Lees as opposed to Amanda Lee.
That S is
it's such a small letter, but really, really important in the grand scheme of things. And we did have a debate on LinkedIn with Catherine Rogers about whether we would be Amanda's Lee or Amanda's Lees or Amanda Lees's. And I don't think we reached a definitive answer because I'm not sure what the plural is.
I don't know what the plural is, but it's great fun. It's lovely to share a first name.
Absolutely.
And a middle initial.
Exactly. We're really making it hard for people.
We are making it hard for people.
It's just that one letter.
It's just the one letter at the end of our surnames. But yeah, it's great to be able to share so much with you and to have such similar passions in so many ways.
Absolutely.
And it's fantastic to have you in Singapore, Mandy.
Delighted to be here. When are you going to come to London? We'll have to do another one in London.
We will. Okay.